we could have lost everything. Like I said, the foundation of our house was crumbling. And I know people who spend a lifetime on the couch not feeling, which breaks my heart. And I know marriages that don't make it through a devastating crisis like this. And so I'm proud of us, and we're actually better now as a couple than we were before any of this happened.
Welcome to The Narratives of Suicide, the podcast where we bring hope, community, and a voice to those who've lost to suicide. It's where we dispel the myths of suicide. We dispel historical discourses and constructs that have been steeped in history for a very long time, and we're here with hope, love, and support for everyone out there who needs to listen to this podcast. I'm so sorry you're here, but I do hope it can give you something to use in your healing process, to be able to pick up the pieces of suicide and put them back together again in the best possible way that you can.
Welcome today to the Healing Narratives of Suicide. Really pleased to have our guest today, Kellie from Colorado. Kellie's here because she lost her son to suicide. Chris, I believe your son's name, yeah?
Yeah.
How long ago did you lose Chris?
Almost exactly 2 years. We're hitting the 2-year mark next month.
Okay, 2 years ago. So thank you so much for being here. Warm welcome.
Thank you.
It's going to be a really interesting conversation because you're launching a book, or you've launched a book, Mount Hope.
Yes.
So great to hear about that and how that's connected to your healing journey of losing Chris. So take us back to your relationship with Chris, what it was like before, maybe what happened, and take us back to what it was like being Chris's mom.
So I have 5 adult children at this point, and 3 of them are natural born and 2 of them were adopted. And Chris was one of my adopted teens. He moved in with us at age 14 and we adopted him at 15. And of course, he had a whole life before we adopted him. He was found on the streets of Wichita, Kansas, age 3, drunk and naked, and his feet were all cut up. And so he had been in the foster care system almost his entire childhood. And there was a lot of trauma there, an unfair amount of trauma and things that happened to him. So when he came to us, he had a lot of baggage, a lot of PTSD, and we just wanted to love him and get him some therapeutic resources and to see if we could turn his life around a little bit. He thrived in high school. He got a football scholarship for a local college, but he only could make it about 1 semester. He came from a DNA tribe of addiction, and so he was very vulnerable to it. And that 1 semester in college just afforded him too much freedom for someone who had a lot of issues and a lot of reasons to hide from those issues. And so then he joined the military, and he did well there until, again, he had free time and money, and addiction became a rather distracting and devastating part of his life. So in 2020, he was in a halfway house. He had been in and out of rehabs and hospitals and jail because of his sort of destructive addiction. And he was doing pretty well. He was 6 weeks sober. And we told him, if you could remain sober until Christmas, we're going to bring you to Colorado and you can live with us and we'll be your family and your support system. But we need a little success under your belt before you come out. And we think the place that you're at right now is the place for that. This is in the summer of 2020, and so COVID is all over the world. Entire countries have shut down, including ours, and schools were trying to decide if they were going to come back in the fall because everything had been shut down and everybody's fear was so high. My husband is a superintendent of schools, and so in July, 1 month before school is going to start, they're trying to decide, are we having school masks, systems in place to keep desks apart, air purifiers, and virtual classrooms with Zoom calls. And so it's very, very taxing and overwhelming for school districts to figure out how to navigate all this new protocols. Mm-hmm. The sheriff walked into his office and notified him in the middle of all this that they found our son and he had taken his life. And so we responded in 2 very different ways, my husband and I. Mm-hmm. He didn't have time to grieve. He had to immediately go back to work and make really, really important decisions. And I laid down on the couch and didn't move and tried to be really, really still and not feel anything and maybe sleep through this pain. And so we were already dealing with the loss of our son very, very differently. We did have to drive to the state next door in Kansas to pick up his remains and bring them back. But after that, we just kind of dealt with it in our own unhealthy ways. Then something very interesting happened. A catalyst was sort of dropped into my lap. I had 2 years prior applied for a game show here in the United States. Ellen DeGeneres is a comedic celebrity here who not only has a daytime show, but some game shows. And I had applied when I was in the classroom, and all my students helped me with the audition tape. And so that was a whole nother life ago.
Right.
Since then, I had retired, moved to Colorado, lost a son, and was in a whole nother place in my life. So I was very surprised to hear from them. And they were locked down because of COVID too. So they said, hey, we're interested in you talking to our casting department and our production team. And I was like, I'm only 6 weeks out from losing my son. I don't know how to be a cheerleader right now or even to express joy. I can't even take a shower. And so I was trying to decide how I was going to handle this. My husband had already started drinking whiskey every night when he came home from work because work is a fabulous distraction from your pain. But once you come home, you sit in your grief, and that is so uncomfortable. He began to drink whiskey, and that scared me a little bit. And I was still on the couch. So I decided I'm going to take advantage of this opportunity. I don't know how I'm going to do it, but I need to get up off the couch anyway. So I went to California, and this was the very first production on the Warner Brothers set in Los Angeles. So they were very serious. It was like full hazmat suits, like booties and the gowns and the surgical hats and gloves and masks and visors. And there was no audience, and every single contestant was isolated. I was quarantined in a hotel room by myself for 6 days and had to take 4 COVID tests before they'd let me on the set. And so I sat in that hotel room for 6 days going, how am I going to do this? I'm still sitting in my grief. I'm supposed to be happy and fun and playful. I don't feel like doing that. And so I realized I'm going to have to sit in my grief and look it right in the eye, or I'm going to be inauthentic and be faking it, right? So I spent that 6 days meditating and praying and reading and sleeping and trying to eat and just talking normal and praying and crying. What came of that, because I hadn't done it for 6 weeks, remember, I was on the couch trying to be very still. When I forced myself to sit in the memories and face the loss, 6 days later, what it enabled me to do was imagine Chris beside me. He was my most enthusiastic, celebratory, hype man, so excited. And he would be over the moon knowing that I got to have this opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
And so by the time I got to the set and had to play games and be silly, I just said a little prayer, grounded myself, and imagined him beside me the entire time. And that worked for me because I had to do the hard work in that room by myself first.
Mm-hmm.
And so, long story short, at the end of the week, I was the winner. I actually won. And even at the moment when I was winning and it was just me and the host and music was playing and there was all this celebration, I literally was inside of my head with him beside me. And so I could laugh and play and celebrate. And so I was really proud of myself. I won $75,000, which is a lot of money. And I was excited to notify my husband and tell him that, wow, I did this really hard, scary thing. I can't wait to tell you what happened. So they're driving me home to the hotel. There's very few people left in the hotel because all the people who didn't win went home. And it was just a handful of winners there. And I get my phone back from the production team and I'm like, Steve, where are you? I have such good news for you. I can't tell anybody until I tell you first. So please respond. And he wasn't responding. And I finally get a little short text that says, yeah, I'll be with you in just a second. I'm on my way home or whatever. And I was sort of annoyed because hours were going by and I had this great big turnaround in my life. And I didn't know until I got home that he was in trouble. He had drank too much, got in the car, got in an accident, was arrested, and charged with a DUI at the exact same moment I was playing on stage with Chris.
Mm.
So we couldn't have been farther apart.
Mm.
And I don't know if other people in your audience or anybody that you know in your clinical work has experienced such diverse healing paths. but it's like we hit a fork and I went right and he went left. And I came home, not that I was healed, right, and all better, but I had hope again. And that I was like, okay, I'm going to go home and help my family heal from this. I'm off the couch and can now look for the future. And when I realized that he was not in a position to receive that because he was at his lowest point of his life, I sort of was resentful about that. And you can't be a superintendent of schools and get this kind of headline and very public and embarrassing thing happen to you. And so the headlines read, Superintendent of Schools is suspended for DUI. Eventually he lost his job. It was on the news stations all throughout our state. And so he was sitting in his shame.
He lost his distraction, didn't he? Because his distraction was work.
Yes, in a very public, embarrassing way, too.
Yeah.
And so I had told the host of the game show that I was going to spend the money on a down payment for our house. And when I got home, I didn't want to do that anymore because I felt like our house was sort of crumbling at its very foundations. And it was sort of rooted in bitterness a little bit too, but I didn't want to spend the money on his lawyer or his court costs or getting his car out of hock. I didn't want to do any of that. And so I ended up buying a tombstone for Chris and I bought myself a used little car and then I gave the rest away. And I acknowledge that's not a very practical response to the crisis because Steve had lost his job. But again, I just wanted it to be mine and I worked so hard for it emotionally during that I kind of wanted it to be my choices. And so I gave money to all the students that helped me make the audition tape. I gave it to the teachers who helped me, some single mom students that I was close to, and then my kids. And I don't have any regrets about that, but I acknowledge there was some bitterness there, the reason I spent it on those things. So like I said, Steve and I are on two different planets. And unless we do make some intentional choices to link arms again, our relationship is going to fall apart. When you lose a child to suicide, you're already in the what ifs and should haves and could haves mind trap games that you sit in, right? All the guilt, and you're already feeling bad that somehow you didn't intervene or your choices may have caused this. And it's unfair, but we sit in that guilt. And so he was already there. And then when I came home and realized we were in such different places and that we couldn't move forward anymore in the way that I had imagined, I was harsh with him and said ugly things to him. And I was pouring more shame and more blame on him. And he can't heal in that environment. But hearing me speak such ugly things to him is not part of my personality. And I felt so ashamed of myself for going there that it was kind of at that, I know, it was kind of at that moment where we need a plan because I actually do want to work through this. And I actually do want to save our marriage. And I actually don't want to treat you this way or become this person that I'm becoming. So we had to create a plan for us because we were going in opposite directions. And I don't know if other relationships experience that kind of crisis after a loss, but circumstances it was like a rolling boulder down a hill. It just got faster and bigger and bigger and bigger. So we've desperately had to create a plan for ourselves.
Yeah, really common. I think everyone grieves differently, and particularly parents who lose their child to suicide. I mean, anybody who loses a child to suicide, there's typically going to be different grief responses and then fractures in the marital relationship because why are you not sad? Why are you not angry? Why are you not on the floor like me? Well, why are you going back to work? Why are you drinking whiskey? Why do you seem to be okay and I'm not? Why have you stopped cuddling me?
Yeah.
I think with the suicide aspect on top of it, there's the blame aspect, and blame is so ugly, goes through every relationship after suicide, let alone mum and dad have lost a child. There's always going to be this not always, there's very typically an element of, well, you did this when he was 6. Oh yeah, but you did this when he was 10.
Yeah.
And you can hear that kind of shame, blame that goes with suicide. It always happens within relationships because where do we put the blame?
Right.
Because blame is such an interesting thing after suicide. Personally, I don't particularly want to blame my brother for what he did because he was in an emotional place where he had to take his own life when 6 years ago. I felt that was just the position he was in.
Right.
So I, as his sister who dearly loved him, I don't want to say this is his fault.
Right.
But I can't blame an illness. I can't blame an accident. The car was the weather because of the car accident. I've got nothing else to blame. So typically, if we can't put it on somebody else, we'll point the director inward. And then a lot of people have got the shame on themselves. I should have done this. I could have done this.
That's right.
But first, and also in the mix that we'll try and our loved closest ones will say, oh yeah, but you did this and you did that. It's so common.
You're absolutely right. Forgive me for interrupting you. You nailed it. That's so true. Every bit of that. And it's also deflection. We don't really want to sit in our shame or blame or internalize sort of the things we should have done differently. And so it's real easy to point outward when you are desperate not to own your own responsibility for things. But the other irony piece of this is that addiction was a part of our son's desperation and reason for his choice. And the ironic part is my husband was becoming someone who was dependent on his coping mechanism, right? And so that made it real easy for me to point my finger. And so I was ashamed of myself, but it was the catalyst to move us into a plan. The first thing we had to do was create a safe space where we could express ourselves without the ugly parts, right? Mm-hmm. And it was a simple two-step plan. You get to freely express yourself as long as you're not hostily attacking the other person. And then the other person has the free space to respond. And so those rules were for me more than him, because I could just rip him to shreds with my words and he would sit there and take it. And so I had to create arena rules for ourselves. And then the second thing we did is we're people of faith. And so we both knew that we had to lean into our understanding of faith and kind of get out of our heads about it and look at from the big perspective of the divine. Mm-hmm. And that was super helpful to us, that it gave us some hope. And we could also sort of yoke ourselves to that faith belief system. And then we went to therapy separately. He went to a therapist, I went to a therapist, and that's where we could let out the frustrations on to a therapist without attacking the spouse, right? It was an appropriate way to express our frustrations and our fears without making the other person have to carry that load. And so that was very intentional too. And then lastly, we had to create for ourselves a new purpose that was not about Chris. It wasn't about the game show. It wasn't about the job loss. So we created a nonprofit. We both feel teachers are really having a hard time staying encouraged and supported. And so we created a nonprofit where we could just pour love and support into teachers. And we hold retreats in the summertime for educators, and they come up to the mountains and we do special things for them. And so creating a project that we both could link arms in was also part of our healing. I can't explain that other than it wasn't about everything that happened in the last 2 years. It was about something we could really be passionate about.
Yeah, it's about future as well, isn't it?
Yeah. And of course, when you lose someone to suicide, I don't know about other people, but I assume the same is true, is that I lost all my creativity. I was right in the middle of writing a book. I couldn't pick it up. I couldn't pick up the guitar. I couldn't put on makeup or even eat healthy or go for walks. All my creativity and energy was I was a shell of a person there for a while. So after Steve and I created a plan for ourselves and we began to see success in that plan, my creative juices started flowing again, and I could pick my book back up and my guitar back up and start eating well and taking care of myself. And so the last bit of our plan in my mind was just using my creative energy to honor Chris. And so I'll tell you about my book here shortly, but at the end of the book, I sort of poured Chris into the story. I'm a fiction writer. And so I was able to include my son in the end of the book. So that was cathartic for me to do that, because it was full circle. It was a complete loss of self. And then it was, okay, I can dance with you again. I went from that on the stage to losing it, getting the air knocked out of me, working it and getting it back. And then this dance in my literary work sort of happened. And so yeah, that was our journey, and we could have lost everything. Like I said, the foundation of our house was crumbling, and I know people who spend a lifetime on the couch not feeling, which breaks my heart. And I know marriages that don't make it through a devastating crisis like this. And so I'm proud of us. And we're actually better now as a couple than we were before any of this happened.
Oh, I'm so pleased to hear that.
Yeah, we're not done. We're not done healing, of course. It's only been 2 years. Just recently put flowers on his grave, and that's bittersweet. I like to honor him, but it's painful to sit in all the good memories too. But you almost have to. That's where healing starts, is to invite in all those good memories so you can be appreciative of it and then understand that it's going to hurt a little bit because you miss him so much. So when I was on the couch, I wasn't inviting in any memories because that was going to hurt. So yeah, it feels like 10 years have passed, but it's only been 2.
It gets really surreal with grief, really surreal. Why does it feel like it was 10 years ago when it was only 2, or the other way around? Why does it feel like yesterday?
Yes.
And I think it's this warped perception of time, because grief is not logical. Time is quite logical. At 2:00, this happens at 4:00. And it's not logical. Grief is the opposite of logical.
Yeah.
It's so overwhelming, sweeps and turnarounds, and you don't know what to expect next. So how can you put time on something so unlogical?
Yeah, I love what you said there, that grief is not logical. That makes more sense. It doesn't recognize the logical time spans and logical responses. And so, yeah, perfectly worded.
Not linear. It's not linear. Like time is linear. It's not linear. It changes every day, doesn't it? You don't know what. Yeah.
Yeah, it sure does. Can I tell you a little bit about my book? Do you mind? I'll keep it very brief.
Yeah. Go ahead. Yeah, it'd be lovely to hear.
So my book is actually a love letter to the LGBTQ plus community. I have been an ally and an advocate and a member of their community for as long as I can remember. And I realized very quickly that there's a crisis of faith that happens in people who want to express themselves truthfully and honestly and authentically. But if they're people of faith, then they hit that wall of like, but it looks like God doesn't like me that way. And that's tragic. And sadly, Christianity, especially in the United States, is used as a weapon to marginalize and discriminate against this group of people. And so I began to entertain the idea, what if Jesus himself came down and said, actually, I don't have a problem with your identity or your sexuality. And I don't care how you decorate your locker. I care how you walk with me in the hallways. And so I wrote a fiction story about a hate crime murder that happens in Topeka, Kansas. And a young man is killed because he is gay. And so the investigation is one part of the plot line. And the other plot line is this conversation between he and Jesus after his passing about being gay and asking those really hard questions that this community wants to ask Jesus himself and also the churches. So at the end of the book, the crime is solved and Jesus and the victim are going to go to heaven. And their conversation is over. Then they hope that it changes the world and creates some healing, safe spaces for this community. And there's a crowd before them and they're the heaven waiting for them. And there's animals and dogs and cats and pets everywhere. And the young victim sees, my son was African American. And so he sees a young Black man approaching with his dog. And he asks Jesus, who is that? And Jesus says, well, that's Chris. And I describe him, of course, as having a great big smile and describe Chris as Chris. And he goes, well, why is my dog? What's going on? And he goes, well, he was the caretaker of your dog until you got here, which is something that Chris would really love. And so it was just this sweet little quick scene in there that really healed me, because there's this old belief system, and I don't know where it came from, but it comes from some faith system. I don't know which one, but that if you lose someone, if someone commits suicide, they don't get to go to heaven. And I don't know where that came from. There is no reason for anybody to believe that nonsense. And I actually had an 83-year-old woman say that to my face. I had told her that I'd lost Chris. And she said, well, that's too bad. He won't be in heaven. And I was like, I don't believe that.
Yeah.
I don't believe that. I don't know where that came from, but that's a lie. And since I'm a person of faith, I know in my knowing that I'm going to see him again. And there's something on the other side of this. And so hope is defiant. Not only is my book refreshing, healing hope for the LGBTQ plus community, but I put Chris in that heaven scene for those 83-year-old women who say, if he took his life, he's not in heaven. I don't believe that. My hope is defiant. And that's some man's rule about that. And I reject it. So pouring Chris into the end of the book, especially in that heaven scene, was absolutely appropriate and healing and cathartic to me and my family, frankly. And so I love that he's in there. And I have a fresh sense of purpose with this book, not only because I have a community that I want to support and advocate for, but also because Chris is in there. And it's a way of advocating for myself in some ways, putting him in that story.
I love the way you said, I reject that. I reject that idea, wherever it came from, wherever that idea came from, that suicide is a sin and Chris isn't going to go to heaven. I reject it, full stop. And I think if more of us can do that, reject some of the stigma that comes ancestrally to suicide, which is a lot of the time unconscious. We don't know it's there. So when we use the word commit suicide, it's such an ingrained thing that we do. We don't realize we're saying it because it's so unconscious. And if you lose someone, you can question it and say, what does commit even mean? It means I committed a crime, and it goes way back. I'm not a historian, but I have gone back into the Middle Ages to look at how suicide was treated. And it's amazing, actually, what they would do to the families of those who died by suicide. They used to take their estate away from them because it was a crime, because thou shalt not murder. The commandment says you shouldn't murder. Right. So if you murder yourself, your family got all the estate taken away.
Right.
They sometimes would take the dead body to trial, so the whole community would see the dead person being trialed for murder. In our day and age, it sounds crazy, but we've got to remember we're seeing this through our century, when it seems abominable at the time. Because everyone worked around religion and that was the way they did things. It was a sin, it was a crime. And it's only recently in lots of countries been decriminalised. So we're still living with that legacy through the words we use, like commit suicide. And until we see that. But I love the way you said, I just reject it. I reject, and I understand where that comes from. And I reject that this is a sin. If we can do that as suicide loss survivors, great. And just put that label on it. Just say, I'm rejecting that. I don't believe my brother's not in heaven. I believe he's somewhere. And I love the way that faith has come into so much of your healing, the faith, because everyone has their own faith. And whether it's religious faith or faith in anything, it can be any kind of belief system. And I see that picking a lot of people up, because when you lose somebody, it shakes your existential beliefs in what's life all about then? Especially when you lose someone to suicide. What's all life all about then? If my loved one can do that, take his own life, then what does life mean? And when our belief system is shattered, whatever type of faith can bring back some of that belief system in a healthier way, which I hear a lot about in your story. It's threaded throughout, isn't it? When I found purpose in the game, and when I found purpose with your husband, when I found purpose in the book, it's helped you to go to the depths and go to the deep side of it and face it. And actually integrate then Chris into your life now, which fascinates me, because it's what's happened in my story. I had to go to the depths of research, go to the depths of even these podcasts to sort of face it and say, this is in my life now, in order to now have a relationship with my brother Andrew that I can't have in reality. But this is my relationship with Andrew going forward. I'm continuing the bonds with him by doing these kind of things. Right. And I just hear that. And I love that that's throughout the story, because it's in many people's stories, really.
Thank you. I think choosing to move forward in your life, right? There's something sort of special about the heart space, in that the pain does not diminish or get smaller. It remains exactly the same in your heart for your entire life, but your heart space seems to accommodate and grow to allow more of the other. And so the grief is still the same, and it still stings when you think about it, but it is so courageous to go to the depths, right? And to really decide that in order for me to live a life fully and not handicapped because of this, I'm going to have to look at it right in the eye and understand it. And you're right, it is an existential crisis, because now you're asking all these questions and trying to desperately, you need the answers, right? And so, I think faith is an important role, no matter what it looks like for you or anybody else. I just think it takes us out of our heads and enables us to be brave. And I can't fully understand the magic of that, but it is miraculous in what it can offer to a hurting heart and a hurting relationship. So thank you for acknowledging that. I appreciate it.
My research has gone in depth into the psychology of that, why suicide loss survivors tend to do a lot of this purpose-filled healing that many of us do, some of us don't. But even if your purpose is deciding today that you're going to have a shower, that's your purpose for today. And if it's purpose-led, that I'm deliberately doing this for me or for somebody else, because I'm still here and I've got to survive this. I'm still here surviving this every day. That purpose-led life, I feel, in my research has shown, it's almost about living out loud because of the stigma and shame around suicide. It's very difficult for us to say to the old lady, like you said, Chris died by suicide.
Mm-hmm.
We disclose how they died, and we'll just say they died.
Mm-hmm.
And when people ask that dreaded question, how did they die? We might lie, or we might avoid the question, or we take a gulp and say it anyway. But we have to take responsibility for that. We have to. We've got no choice, because we're the loved one explaining it to somebody else.
Right.
So because of that stigma and shame, I've phrased it in my research. It's almost as if people that I interviewed had to live out loud. They had to kind of put it out there and say, my brother died by suicide, in a way that was permissible in society.
Mm-hmm.
So it's permissible me doing this podcast, but it's not necessarily permissible for me to go down the street and tell the old lady, because I might ruin her day. So
right.
Many people do that, find their way, because it's almost permission to live their grief out loud, because to keep it inside on their own is so painful, understandably, because it's too heavy to do that.
It is. And of course, in most cases, isolation played a part in the devastating choice of our loved one, right? And isolation is exactly where we find ourselves when we're the healers and survivors of it. And so our faith community, my colleagues, my friends, a lot of them don't know what to say. So they don't say anything at all, because they're afraid they're going to hurt me if they bring up the topic. And so you do sit in isolation. And the only way to get out of that is to speak your truth. And as soon as you do, a new tribe shows up, right?
Yeah.
I have a community of moms who have experienced the same thing as I have. And we now are linked arms, because I have a tribe of people who understand and get it and realize that it's not fluid or linear, right? It's fluid, the healing process. And so the only way to move out of your isolation is to give yourself permission to live out loud. You're exactly right. And to live right now. Sometimes if you overthink it and you're thinking too much of, well, how am I going to do Christmas? How am I going to handle anniversaries? What about that wedding he's going to miss?
Mm-hmm.
If you think too much in the future, you'll scare yourself back into a place of closedness. And so I think that living in the right now, you mentioned, all right, today I'm going to take a shower. Right now I'm going to take a shower, and that's going to be my self-care. And so sometimes it's kind of like the 12-step addiction process. It's like, I'm going to take one step at a time and not think too much about what the future is going to look like without Chris. I'm just going to experience right now. And so it's a strange journey, and one few fully understand except those who are reluctantly part of this community. But it takes courage to face it, and it takes courage to speak it so that you can find your support system.
And it might not be that you're ready to do that today, but just open up to the idea that when you are ready, then go for it. Even if it's in the smallest way, find a Facebook community and just watch for a while before you actually post. Find and just intuitively then ask yourself, is this the right community for me? And you can always step away then at any point and step back in again. Because of those waves that come, there's times when we need it and times when we don't. But we can use that when we feel it's appropriate for us, because we need to do grief our way. And I think it's permission to do it your way, isn't it? A lot of it.
Yeah.
Not like your husband or like the person down the road. And ultimately that comes into that pattern as well of just the frictions that can happen in families.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And being brave is, I had mentioned that the momentum of our crisis just kept getting worse and worse and worse. And it was like a boulder going down the hill. Well, so was being brave. And those small steps, like you said, of joining a Facebook community, but just lurking and not contributing yet. And then the first time you like something and the first time you speak up, there are also real live in-person groups that exist like this, not just on Facebook. But being brave is also a boulder getting faster and bigger down the hill. It gets easier the more often you do it, because you realize the satisfaction in being recognized in your pain. And so the momentum of courage is something that I sort of want to dangle in front of people and say, there's hope. Have hope for that. If you feel insufficient or weak today, you won't feel like that all the time. Just one little step right now is the place to start.
I love that. Can we end just with that note? I think that's a lovely way to end this podcast, YouTube video, wherever this goes out into the world.
Yeah.
Do it your way and have hope that you can do it your way, because that's a lot we lose. And just trust that you know your way of doing this, and there is hope that you can make it yours, make it your journey.
Yeah.
Before we go though, please tell us when your book's out and how people can get it. And we'll put any links into the description as well of how they can get it.
Of course, I am launching my book on the week of June 21st, which at the time of this podcast is going to be next week. So probably by the time this airs, it will be available on Amazon in all formats, hard copy, soft copy, and Kindle. I have a website, kelliewolf.com, where I write blog posts not only about Chris being in my book and gatekeepers of the faith and also just fun book facts, but you can also follow me on my website over to Amazon. But honestly, you don't need to go to my website. Just go straight to Amazon.com, the biggest book distributor in the world, and you'll be able to find my book called Mount Hope. So I'm really excited. Thank you for letting me promote it a little bit here.
No, thank you so much for being here. Really appreciate it.
I appreciate what you're doing.
Wonderful, hopeful journey for anybody listening. Thank you.
Thank you, Sue.
Thanks so much for joining us here today. I hope it served you and given you something for your journey with suicide. Come back and subscribe, like, do whatever you need to do on your platform to help us to raise awareness of suicide, because the more we keep saying the word, the more we can gain support for us left behind, and the more we can raise awareness of the word and how society sees it and reduce this stigma that's so attached to it. Please get in touch. You can find me on my website, suicidegriefsupport.com. I really want to hear from you. But for now, please take care of yourselves and take care of each other. And remember, we are stronger together.